Hello and welcome to the inaugural Leaders Lounge podcast. My name is Simon Cohen, founder of Cohesis. I've established this podcast as a place for business leaders to share ideas and thoughts and insights. To kick things off, I'm delighted to be joined by Roger Blow, practice manager at Cove Legal. So, Roger, it's great to have you on this first podcast. We've been talking about this for a while, haven't we?
We have.
And maybe to kick things off, maybe start off by telling us a little bit about your background and what led you to start Cove Legal.
Cove Legal, I started around 11 years ago now, having worked for quite a few law firms since about 1999, both in the UK and also over here in Perth, Australia. I've always enjoyed having the freedom to manage a firm. I've got up my own and be able to kind of control what I do and how I do it. So it's obviously been a journey having your own operation rather than working within. I was used to having, IT teams and HR teams and people to do lots of things to help me. Whereas obviously when you do your own practice, there's a lot more hands-on work. But no, I've loved the last 10 years. So that's really my background is in bigger city commercial firms. Whereas now I run obviously very, very much smaller operation with Cove Legal.
And what areas of law do you focus on?
Well, the easy answer is I'm generally a commercial litigator. So almost any commercial dispute that might or could end up in any of the courts. That said, I don't specialize, say, in employment law, which is quite a specialist area, and I don't do criminal law. I don't do family law, but certainly any kind of commercial civil dispute work I do generally. But specifically kind of two areas I've really ended up specializing in over the last 10, 15 years has been both defamation and media law generally, and also tax disputes on both sides of the fence involving the Australian Taxation Office.
Right. Okay. And that's really, really interesting. And how do you find the difference from working in a larger organization to then being the boss and working in as you say, a much smaller operation where everything kind of comes through yourself? What's been the challenges in making that transition?
Oh, heaps of both good and bad. Challenge is definitely around all of a sudden being in charge of, for example, the financial side and things like cash flow and invoicing and chasing invoices. Dealing with lawyers, if we want to use any trust account funds for clients, which with litigation sometimes I do need to. I have to therefore have a trust account, which I handle and I manage, and I have to get audited on every year. And so things like the financial side, to be honest, if you only ever work within very large law firms and heaps of lawyers, that's all they ever do. You never have to worry about how the accounts work, how cash flow works, how trust monies work. It all gets done for you. And obviously, you get paid a wage. So that side's definitely been a challenge. Marketing also, obviously, you all of a sudden, that's your job as well, 100%. There's no one else to organize any events or to put out any marketing or promotional stuff. So all those, most of it, I suppose, what you might call soft skills that aren't really being a lawyer. That's all the stuff that you naturally do a lot less of when you work within a big operation. All that a big firm wants you to do is sit there and do law at a high hourly rate. I mean, that's your contribution to the business, and they don't want you to do anything else because that's how you obviously are most profitable. So that really changes when you get the good side. Though is I love having the flexibility of running my own operation. I love being able to choose 100%, who I work for, sometimes who I don't work for, even down to delivery and pricing. If I decide something's just not the right price or has taken too long or all those things that are pressures within a big firm, you try writing off a sizable amount of a bill in a large firm, that's hard. Sometimes you're quite high even to get authority as a partner to do that. And so I've enjoyed definitely the flexibility.
And how do you see what you talk about there in terms of managing cash flow and there's there's a lot more kind of flow and rolling of decisions, whether it's finance or, as you say, events and what have you. How much of that is quite manual for you? How much of that do you use systems and technology to support what you do?
So I have contractors that do my kind of the pure accounting side and expenses and payroll. And I just literally, get given a figure, for example, from the payroll side to do at the end of the month, which is nice. So they are definitely, I've subcontracted that work, but a lot of it, to be honest, I suppose, a lot of it is manual. I raise my own invoices. I've become at least semi-compliant within Xero, for example, as an accounting business platform. I can issue an invoice invoice, I can amend an invoice, and et cetera, et cetera. And as I said, I'm having to manage the accounting side, especially trust accounting, because for a lawyer, if I receive money, it has to be formally receipted. It has to be entered onto ledgers, several ledgers, and all that gets, as I said, all that gets audited. So that's definitely, that takes up a chunk of my time, which sometimes you can get people to help with within the firm. But obviously then, that's where you've got colleagues working with you.
Yeah, no, indeed. And then with regards to defamation law and things like that, what are the kind of cases that you get involved in that space? Is it more people on people, or is it businesses on businesses, or is it just a mixture of the two?
Totally both. I mean, I started, I got into defamation as an area of law way back at the start of my career in the UK. I was really lucky to work within a firm that had a partner there who had done some quite high profile defamation work in London and had then moved out to a different city, but he still kept that bit of the practice, but he now wasn't kind of regularly doing defamation work. So as a very junior solicitor, I was all of a sudden handling matters on a day-to-day level for people like as another Englishman, Simon, you'd know who Neil Kinnock was. I'm not sure how famous he was in WA, but he was Maggie Thatcher's opponent, and he became a minister for of the European Parliament. And so, for a couple of years, I did a lot of defamation work for him, which was just really exciting as a junior lawyer,
right? To
be working for a genuine, international international figure and politician. So that really gave me the bug for defamation. And look, I love language, I love words, I love meaning, and in all of its context. So defamation is all about that. It's about someone saying something which is not true. That's obviously an important first point. Not true, but also damaging. And it's that the damaging bit is where it gets more grey and complex and strategic, because what does that statement mean? How can that be understood by a reader? Because there's very different things between calling someone, say, something black and white, like he is a thief. That's a statement of fact. That's an allegation of fact. And it's very black and white. So either they are or they're not, and you're going to have to prove it if you're going to make that allegation. But if you were to say, to use that example, I watched X pick up an item from Woolworths and walk out of the shop, put it in their pocket. You haven't called them a thief, but you have still made statements that would be understood by most people reasonably to be an allegation that they stole something from Woolworths. See what I mean?
Yeah,
it all comes into what words mean and what imputations arise from the words. And that's really what the defamation I've really liked. But to answer your question, it varies as to who the two sides are, completely varies. A lot of defamation naturally is done by individuals. So normally it's never always an individual that's published. The question is more who the defendant is. So I'm sometimes acting for other individuals. And obviously social media comes into defamation a lot these days, but I also often act for companies, because it's not at all unusual for defamation to involve a strategic maneuver by someone to publish false statements with the intention of damaging a business, either for malice, because they're upset with the business, or not unusually due to commercial reasons. And so plenty of certainly my more complex defamation matters often do actually involve at least one of the plaintiffs being a company.
And how much does social media kind of contribute, or the increasing prevalence of social media? Does that increase the prevalence or the I suppose the risk of slander? I know, and if slander or defamation has potentially occurred, does that make the perception of damage greater because there's more eyeballs on it?
I would say social media has been a game changer in every aspect for defamation. In every way, it has been a game changer in that it has massively increased the prevalence of defamation as an event, and it has also increased the damage caused and the speed with which damage is caused, even in what you might call so if we think of what we might call a traditional style defamation case, let's say an article in a newspaper. So defamation used to be predominantly a newspaper, a radio station, a TV channel. They were the main areas because they did the most damage, because that's how lots of people heard about whatever the allegation is. Now, you still also had defamation, especially within, say, corporate scenarios where, for example, an AGM, someone gets up and starts making allegations about the chairman of the board or something. So you'd still get defamation clearly that didn't involve mainstream media, but a lot of defamation had a mainstream media angle. Now, the vast majority of defamation cases would actually be social media. I think that would now easily outstrip the mainstream media cases. You still read more about the mainstream media because they're still the bigger cases. But to be honest, if you're doing it on a purely percentage basis, I don't have a stat, but I mean, social media would now be far and away the biggest player. But also, even with the traditional type of case, which I've just described, now if the West Australian publishes something which is found to be defamatory, they don't just put it in the paper. They've also got it on their Facebook page,
multiple channels, multiple channels.
It's going out everywhere.
So,
and
so on that then, who are the biggest kind of like culprits? Is it more the senior people who may post something, or is it more mid-management, or just somebody who works in an organization typically or is it across all areas? But if I were to have a guess, I would say it's probably more the senior people, but I'm interested in your take.
I'm already chortling because I was just thinking, to use a colloquialism, the biggest culprit now is Karen. And apologies to anyone watching this called Karen.
Apologies to all Karens.
I genuinely feel almost guilty every time I use that colloquialism. But yeah, the concept of the easily upset and over entitled would probably be a fair summary of the concept of the Karen, so to speak.
Yeah.
That is now, I think, the biggest culprit of defamation, as you put it. It's on social media. It is people that have been, upset by someone or something. And if that happens to be, for example, a business, then next minute you have got, a very vitriolic, often well over the top, either review or comments on their page or whatever. You now get a whole layer, I think, of society that has been taught that what I might call kind of social media terrorism is now, it's part of life. It's fair game.
Yeah.
Look, I don't agree with that, but that seems to be the way that we're heading.
No, and that's interesting. So just a thought that's just occurred to me actually is that the kind of work that we sometimes do when we go into organizations and we look at policies and governance and things like that, we'll look at the social media policy, we'll look at acceptable use policies and those kind of rules that hopefully or try to protect against these. And I know that we often focus even on the social media policies, like what you must not do, et cetera. And we feel as though that we try and cover those bases in the sense, don't post anything defamatory or, that could put the organization into some form of jeopardy. So we kind of feel as though that we cover that. But it's obviously not foolproof. Are there any kind of tips or tricks that, for people who may be, for our audience as to what they should consider, any other kind of layers of protection for themselves if there's CEOs or business leaders are watching this, how can they protect themselves from the Karens in their organization?
Well, I think you've already touched on the concepts of internal controls, which definitely is important for any organization that has a social media profile, which is the vast majority of organizations and companies now, but especially one that benefits from and cares about on a kind of, profit making angle, its social media footprint. Then control of what can come out of the organization onto social media is obviously therefore very important. And it's an obvious statement, but you want experienced people who understand how social media works. And I know that may sound like a strange statement, but I've often over the years, as a lawyer that advises on, as well as defamation, kind of media issues and crisis management. So I've sometimes been called in to help manage major crises, which these days generally explode online. You need often a blend of either people, or if it's a person, you need a blend of experience, because you can't have a lawyer, for example, just coming in and saying, say nothing, just say nothing.
Yeah.
Because to be honest, that can sometimes be the safe harbor that many legal advisors will go to, because we're kind of taught, a bit like the doctors, do no harm. So we're taught not to ever allow something that we say on behalf of a client or that our client says to actually make the situation worse. And sometimes that can have a bit of a freezing effect in the lawyer, thinking it's perhaps best just to say nothing. If you talk to a communications advisor, however, or PR agents as they used to be known, they will generally say, you've got to be in the dialogue. If the company's being talked about, you can either be part of the conversation or you can just listen to what everyone else says about you. That's kind of the other end of the scale. You must talk, whereas the lawyer potentially is going, saying nothing. The reality is, I think, you need a bit of both, because it rarely is in a situation, there's hardly any situation, even if something tragic has happened, just say someone has lost their life, which is the worst thing that could happen with any business or in life generally. You can still express, just say it's an employee, you can still express condolences and thoughts with, for example, the family. Now, there's nothing there about liability, fault, investigation, nothing any of that, but you can still give a message which is respectful, humanistic, reasonable, etc. So I think you need to have practices in place and protocols in place that allow you to respond, but naturally respond well. So I'd say that. I'd say having protocols, especially the bigger the organization, the better your protocol should be to deal with something like that. Having controls over who can post is another thing. And I'd also add, being careful of what you republish, because especially in this state, in WA, we still have the old Defamation Act, 2005 that was brought in. Half the country had gone to a 2021 Act, which does have some changes that are relevant to this space. But you still have the concept in WA of every publication being a publication which is actionable. So, you have your first publication, but then you can have another one down the line and someone else republishes. So you've got to be careful what you also republish, because that's your publication. And I think sometimes that's the bit, especially on social media like Instagram, Twitter's the worst example. The concept of a retweet. How many people really think about the accuracy of the thing they're retweeting? I don't think many do.
I think Twitter's now a kind of free for all. It's kind of descended into kind of anarchy. I think on especially some of the things that on my feed, I've kind of started to kind of give up on it. But just one other question: do you think companies or leaders of companies know enough about defamation laws and what constitutes that? Do you feel as though there's a gap there when they're kind of creating policy and frameworks?
Oh, look, if everyone fully understood defamation laws, I wouldn't have a job. So I'm gonna instantly say no. Look, I think a well-crafted policy is great, but I do think the world of defamation, or more to the point, the world that causes or can cause defamation is so varied and can arise in so many situations. I don't think that any policy or protocol can ever fully cover every situation. At the end of the day, there's a fair amount of common sense that does come into this. And the idea of, there's lots of, you could name loads of rules, don't send an email whilst angry. There's a good one. That's got nothing to do with the protocol, but that's just good common sense in business generally. It's certainly a comment I've heard repeated, countless times over 20 odd years.
Yeah, so I've often told myself that one as well.
Exactly. But we don't need you wouldn't have a protocol saying that. It would look a bit weird, but it's good advice. Yeah, think about who you're publishing to as well, how widely it's being published. And also, I think a lot of this is, do you need to say it? And that's where kind of that whole concept of the emotion of defamation comes in as well. A lot of defamation comes out of either frustration or anger. Neither are good emotions in business generally, I would say. Unless you're a sportsman. I think, but a lot of that really, as I said, that's common sense and good leadership. And that's really what saves most companies from getting into too much trouble.
How has AI transformed maybe how you operate or how other companies that you work with and across? Have you seen much of a change or adoption of AI, and how and to what level? How much of a help or a hindrance is it?
Within law, and in particular, I'm going to focus on law in the context of what I do, which is dispute work, and therefore involving courts. A lot of the most important documents I produce have to get filed with either a court or a tribunal. I have to say, in the last 18 months, a lot of attempts to use AI in that legal space have been quite publicly bad, in the sense that there are reports of lawyers using AI to generate, for example, submissions. So when we have to file an argument at court, we prepare a document, and that document is called submissions, and that's kind of, I suppose, your legal argument. And another concept within common law systems, which Australia is one of those, is that you rely on previous decisions. And we bring the court's attention to those decisions by way of what are known as citations, which is the number and the year and the name of the case, so that you say to the judge, look, you should agree with my client's position because their position is in keeping with these previous decisions of either this court or a superior court or whatever. And so you give them those cases with citations. And I think it was an American lawyer who quite famously, maybe 6 or 9 months ago, filed a document with court, and maybe he was rushing, I don't know. And he used AI. I think he used Chat GPT or one of the, I won't defame any particular one. I can't remember which one it was, but it was one of these AI search engines. And he created the document with the citations, and it basically made up citations. Now, it's quite confusing to think how it even did that, but I know that AI is a bit of a scary beast at times. So literally he filed a document at court with false citations, like made up. They didn't exist. These cases had never happened. And that got found out. The judge worked this out, and he got absolutely reamed by the judge, and for good reason. So that was one of the earliest times that a lawyer that I'm aware of tried to use AI in that type of context, and it was bad. And there's been a few cases now of similar stuff. So look, I think AI can be incredibly useful. I was only thinking of this earlier today, thinking about this this chat. I think AI can be very useful, even in my space, where you have control of the input, so that you are using AI tools to either summarize, collate, organize.
Exactly right. I completely agree.
So I know what I've got, and I know that I've got hours of work to wade my way through. And some cases, some dispute cases involve just horrible number of the documents, right? And a client has to pay the lawyer to sit there with their own eyes. Now, where you've got a known source, and for me, everything about AI is source and integrity of source. If you punch stuff into something online like ChatGPT, you are opening up the answer to the world of the internet, as I understand it. I mean, it could be coming from anywhere. You don't know where it's getting information from.
Yeah.
It's amazing that it can get access to everything. That's kind of good, but it's also kind of bad because it doesn't discern between a good source and a bad source. Hence, you end up with fake citations. Whereas I think if you know what you have put into the machine, so I know it's those 1,000 documents and that's all, using AI to then help me collate, summarize and organize that, I think can save hours and hours.
Massive amounts of time.
Which is also therefore a lot of money. That's a lot of money for a client. Hours and hours of lawyer time is expensive. So
I agree. And I did a talk recently, organization, local government professionals, and I was talking around digital sustainability actually, but we were also talking around the use of AI and automation. And these terms often get used interchangeably, but they are kind of different things. But from an AI perspective, I see AI in there's two main camps. In the way that local government specifically, and also other organizations either are using it or thinking about using it. One, I would say, is around personal productivity. So spell checking, summarizing of notes, summarizing meeting notes and things like that would naturally save time, or creating agendas and things like that. Where it's kind of like, saving that individual person's time. But then if you think more broadly, there's also the concept of operational productivity. So, we'll often work with, say, manufacturers or, professional service organizations or what have you. And they're looking at ways of leveraging AI to, maybe streamline operations generally. And to your point about inputs, if you've got a known input and you've got like a subset of inputs that what that source is, that can, as you say, it saves a lot of time. Where you're going out into the market, as it were, out into the internet and pull me back some information, if it's more broad than a search and you're asking it to do some stuff with incomplete information, it tends to give erratic kind of answers. And the problem then becomes is how much do you trust what's coming back? And you have to have a certain level of knowledge to understand whether what's coming back is actually relevant and valid and correct. And if you don't, or if you don't check it closely enough, like to your example with the case references, with the citations, then you can end up in a world of pain. So I think yes, it saves a lot of time, or it can save a lot of time, but you also have to know what it is that you actually want out of it. And you also have to prep it in the right way. If you just kind of blasé about it and say, okay, I've got an answer back, it looks right, that's where, and you don't do enough, you don't have enough checks and balances. That's where I've seen people step away from, because it's too hard for them at that point. But you also need to have the right caliber of person who's actually feeding the information and validating what's coming back. So it's not a panacea.
And you mentioned, we've been talking a lot about defamation and media. There's kind of two areas that I think the risks of AI at different levels has really kind of come to the fore. One is very recent, and it's very much AI, which is where I believe AI was used to summarize. I think it was used to summarize a court case. So someone was trying to save time to summarize either a decision or another report on a court case. And in essence, they got the AI generated a report that I think maybe got the parties the wrong way around, or maybe ended up making, it was a completely false reference to an individual. And it suggested, I mean, this, just for one of an example, maybe it suggested that, someone was maybe part of the bikies or something, when they absolutely weren't. And in fact, in that case, it was the other way around. They were meant to be, they were like maybe against the bike. So AI was used to summarize, and it just got it completely wrong. Now, that's a risk from a defamation point of view. To go back to one of your earlier questions, using AI with no checks and balances to produce content where you're asking it to save you time by, say, summarizing stuff, that stuff's got to be proofread. If that's going out under your company banner, then the idea of, but hold on, I've managed to pump out five Instagram posts or 5 Facebook posts, and it's way quicker. Well, that's great. But if the one that goes horribly wrong, how much damage you're doing compared to the little benefit of saving yourself and getting 5 out rather than 3? I don't know if there's a cost benefit analysis there, to be honest. The other one actually is older, because it's been around for years now. That's the issue of, which is kind of, it's not AI, but it kind of is, automatic wording in Google. So when you start typing something in, and there's quite a fun game you can have where you can start typing a question and see what the most common questions are, which can sometimes be hilarious. But anyway, there are cases that have been brought against Google, because if you type certain people's names in, the auto create question that they were coming up with, which is an AI algorithm, I believe, was basically coming up with defamatory statements about that person. So there'd been some court case or whatever, and the algorithm was picking up commentary from others, a bit like what the AI is doing now in going and getting content and creating it. So the Google algorithm was picking up on other people saying things that were quite defamatory of someone, and saying, "Oh, you must be looking for this," and it's auto-generating the question. And so there's been some really interesting defamation cases. Actually, the last one that I read lost. So the plaintiff lost against Google, and I actually thought that was a harsh decision personally. But maybe that's just because I'd like to see the big media companies taken more to task generally. A bit of a soapbox issue for me. But yeah, so that's kind of AI. I suppose that's early uses of the principle of AI, because I suppose it's pretty much what Google were doing a long time ago, going out into the whole internet and then pulling out what they think you're looking for. So yeah, it's a risky space.
And I suppose just casting your mind back to your time in larger law firms, from a technology perspective, where were typically, obviously things have advanced now, but where were typically the main pain points, would you say, from the application of technology in a legal setting? I mean, obviously you use your own organization as context as well, but I'm just interested generally in terms of where does the rubber meet the road when it comes to technology pain points in legal firms?
I would probably class dispute work into two groups, and the answer is totally different for the two. One would be an argument where the real battle is over the law and the legal argument and the legal principles. Those cases are not necessarily really much about large amounts of documents. It's about the law, which means it's very much about the pleadings and about the legal kind of, the legal skills of the legal argument. And I don't think really technology or AI helps a great deal with that, to be honest. Maybe case research a bit, but really small number of documents, and the key time is spent on what we would call the pleadings, the legal argument. The other group of legal disputes would be where it's more about the facts and more about the evidence. So if you think of your average, I don't know, say construction dispute. Now, construction disputes are for large construction jobs, and I've been involved in a few in my time. That's much more about often masses of documentation. I once had a team of about 10 law clerks for weeks on end, just sat there at 10 PCs trying to wade through circa 1 million documents. And this was in one of the very big firms, and having to go through and categorize documents and find keywords and then put the different documents into different groupings to do with the words. Now, that's a lot. That was 15 years ago. I suspect that AI now would do a fair chunk of that work. But at the time, I had a whole team for, as I said, weeks on end, day in, day out doing that. That, I think, is where AI really comes in. But again, that is a known source. That was a known source of documents that were discovery documents. Yeah. And unfortunately, so many of them. So yeah, disputes that are very evidence heavy, document heavy, that's where I think AI and technology can really streamline the admin and the process.
And what about client communications and keeping on top of matters and things like that? How effective are the tools in the industry these days going from, because we often work, say with manufacturers or professional services, opportunity comes in, it will somehow circle through, maybe come into a CRM, go into an engine, whether it's a project management system or it's a MRP system, and then it goes through to finance. So your engine will be whatever manages your case matters and what have you. How much technology, with the players in the market, how effective are those systems in handling end to end? Do you typically use one system end to end, or do organizations have different systems at different parts of the process?
When I've worked for, so I suppose by the time I came to at least Australia, kind of all big firms had very much gone into document management systems. Probably when I first started back in 99, 2000, we were obviously using emails, word processors and saving documents, but it wasn't quite as kind of organized. But certainly since I've been in Oz, every big firm I've worked for have always had their own document management system. And look, to the non-IT person, to be honest, Simon, I suspect that we don't necessarily even know, and that's maybe a silly statement, but we don't even necessarily know what we're using in a technology sense. Because it's probably been given a name, and it's probably been, someone will say, I'll save that into blah, whatever that firm calls their document management system. Sometimes it might even be their own name, but you would be able to look at it and go, oh, well, what's driving that in the background is this program. So I can't tell you all the different document management systems I used. All I know is every time I joined a different firm, I had to get trained in how to open up a matter file, save a document to that file, how to save emails, whatever the email protocol was for saving. Some did it automatically. Others, you had to do it if you were the first person named in the email. I know one firm I worked at had that. They've all got their own way of working. Most of them quite sophisticated, I would say. And look, from a small working in my own practice, then that's a challenge. I've ended up becoming a OneDrive, Microsoft 365 guy, and everything I do really is in there, which I know is a space that you guys are active in as well, in kind of making that work the best it can. So that's been my approach, has been to very much embrace Microsoft and just do everything through there, including all my, my document saving. Obviously, it's got all my emails within Outlook. So that's been my approach, and I've integrated that with a time recording system. I must admit, when I first started, I just kind of did that manually, and then I thought, man, this is a lot of admin, and I kind of missed my time recording systems, because then it's nice, as a lawyer, you're doing that all the time.
You live off that, You live off that.
Yeah. So I ended up for the last 6-7 years, probably, maybe longer, I've used something called, I think it's called Minute Doc on the top of my head, which I found good. So I think having something that at least streamlines that is important. I mean, I said there's lots of programs out there, and it's probably having someone like you that can actually help clients with how it all fits together. Because it's one thing to know that there's something out there that you can go and subscribe to and get a license for and use. Yeah. Whether that thing fits with everything else you're doing and whether or not it integrates well. I've managed to get things that seem to integrate well. That, I think, is probably the magic, and that's
absolutely. I mean, as you said, we do work on do a lot of work on the Microsoft platform. It's interesting that you've gravitated towards that. And I completely understand, your sentiments around integrations being key. And we find that a lot of organizations are starting to do just that, is kind of gravitate closer to the Microsoft stack. I think with what Microsoft have done in terms of implementing or expanding or extending the Power Platform is also really interesting. You probably don't need to use that too much, but what we've noticed in talking with other law firms is for them where they've got the onboarding process is such that can be problematic. And, I do think there's a lot that can be done in that space to streamline the initial data collection for matters. I think with your kind of document management and kind of how you describe it and the integration, you just want something to be easy. When we've spoken to larger law firms, and from the work that I've done so far, it's very similar to organizations in the financial space, tax space and what have you, where they get opportunities coming in. How do they deal with those opportunities then going through into largely documents and statements and kind of things like that? So I do see a lot of similarities in both of those spaces. And I find it, quite interesting. I didn't know you were going to say that that's what you've done with Microsoft, but I find that quite interesting and very much on trend with what we find with a lot of organizations. I think the thing is, just one other thing, I think the thing is that many organizations don't quite know what to do with the Microsoft platform, specifically larger organizations. They've got their emails, they've got the documents, they've got Microsoft Office, and they don't really necessarily understand what else can be done with that platform. And I think that's probably one of the next stages, along with AI, in terms of what many organizations will look at in terms of using AI effectively, but also how they can do more with the licenses that they've got. But that's an interesting thing. Just one last question. Tell me about the things that you do outside of being a lawyer. I know obviously about Cove Legal Racing, but you do other things as well. Tell us a little bit about your passions and your hobbies outside of the legal profession.
I want outside of the obvious answer of family and partner and all those based around the home. If you're talking kind of hobbies, because I don't think my partner or my kids will want me to refer to them as a hobby. If you're talking hobbies and pastimes, it's probably two main passions for me, which are many decades old, or certainly music's many decades old. Since I was a kid, I've been doing some level of performing music somewhere. I grew up in a bit of a musical family back in the UK, and so I've always been doing something along that lines. And that, by the time I moved to Australia and I lost contact with all the musical contacts I had, and I had to obviously leave the band I was in back there, I found that it was a bit of a gap. And that led me to start organising an event since about, when did I start? 2009, I think it was.
Really?
The corporate battle of the bands, which, to be honest, the start of that was the opposite of some kind of Bob Geldof, moment. It was actually me missing playing music and thinking, I want my work band that's just done a Christmas party to play again. How do I play again and not have to wait till Christmas? I thought, well, if I organise a corporate battle of the bands, then other companies must have the same thing, and I'll get to play again. It was that kind of selfish, quite frankly. But then, having started doing it, I thought, well, if I'm going to do it, then it kind of makes sense. Should do it for a charitable cause, and that started the road of what then became, what's now 15 years of and now to me, it's more a fundraiser, and it's been great the last 5 years, 6 years, raising money for Youth Focus, which is a child kind of depression, suicide and self-harming charity, which is a great charity here in WA, and also Cystic Fibrosis WA. So there's two charities that get the money from that. But look, every year, and the next one's coming up in February, on the 8th of February at the Charles Hotel, just to do that plug. Every year around that time, I love the fact that I have this massive dose of music, and I'm furiously rehearsing with mates to put a band into that event. And then the rest of the year, it's kind of trying to do other stuff. So I do a bit of DJing now to kind of scratch the itch, as I say, in a music sense, just to have some fun around that. So music always, and playing music, listening to music, absolutely love that. And since the last 11 odd years, I've got a fair bit into cycling. So as you mentioned, Cove Legal Racing. So I'm not sure there's another law firm in Perth that's got its own cycle racing team. I'm not sure it's amazing marketing, but it's fun. So every year I've been doing that, and again that took me into Ride for Youth, the Hawaiian Ride for Youth, which is the main kind of community fundraiser for Youth Focus. So that's where the link comes with the Battle of the Bands and also that ride. So that's been I've met some amazing people doing that. So fair bit of cycling, sometimes even just in a spin class or something. Fair bit of music, and they'll be the main things I've really quite enjoyed.
Fantastic. Well, look, I've appreciated this chat, Roger. This is the first one of a series, and I think what you've shared is really interesting, or hopefully really interesting for other business leaders and other people who are in this space. If anyone's watching this and may want some legal assistance, how can they contact you? Where should they reach out to you?
Well, with Cove Legal and with a name like Roger Blow, I'm quite easy to find online. So it's not the most common name. So yeah, look, there's obviously the website covelegal.com.au, or my email's easy, roger@covelegal.com.au. So yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. Also on LinkedIn or whatever. So I don't. I do a lot of media law, but as a result, I like to think I'm careful in what I post, and as a result, I certainly don't hide online. I'm pretty easy to find, to be honest. So yeah. Yep, it's simple enough to track me down through any of those routes.
Okay, well, look, it's been great to have a chat, Roger. Thank you for your time. And as I say, this is the very first one. We've got other guests lined up. So, and it's just all about trying to find different perceptions, insights of people who run companies or senior managers in their organizations to kind of share some knowledge and tips and insights. Are there any kind of last tips or hints or tips that you'd like to leave as a takeaway for anyone in terms of litigation or corporate law or anything like that?
I was just suddenly thinking, man, I haven't thought of any final tip. But no, when you widened it, okay, let's just get off the defamation. My massive hint and tip, which I find myself repeating constantly, for litigation generally, not defamation, just litigation generally. Your litigation spend should be no different to your marketing spend, if I can use that comparison. Bang for buck. What am I getting? How much am I spending? And what is my chance of getting the outcome I think I'm going to get? So if you look at marketing, what am I sponsoring? How much is it going to cost me? And what do I think I'll get by way of more work if I do that, whatever that opportunity is? Litigation should be exactly the same cost-benefit analysis. And if it's not, then that means emotions involved there, and in which case that's not business. So I always say I'm a commercial litigator, because to me, there's got to be a commercial point. And I find myself repeatedly sometimes saying to clients, look, I get it. I get you're upset, or maybe even legally you're right. But what's the point? Like, what are you going to get? That they've got no assets, so they're not going to get your money. So why, so I like to do, I think, cost benefit analysis or bang for buck. I think that's the bit that's sometimes missed in dispute advice and litigation. Like, it's got to be worth it. It's got to be.
So basically, two things I've heard from there is don't let emotion get in the way of sending an email or a post online, and don't let it get in the way of sound commercial litigation, kind of bang for buck in terms of, is it really worth doing? Don't let emotion lead you down the wrong paths. And I think on that note, we'll kind of leave it there. If anyone in the audience would like to be a guest on this podcast, then please feel free to reach out to us at leadersloungepodcast@cohesis.com.au. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me directly, my email address is simon.cohen@cohesis.com.au. Many thanks, Roger. We'll speak again soon.
Honored to be in the guinea pig Leaders Lounge.
Pleasure. Take care, Roger.
Thanks, Simon.
Thank you.
Cheers.